Welcome to Flex Perspectives, where I interview the thought leaders, innovators, and executives shaping the future of flexible work. Flex Perspectives is brought to you by the Flex Index, the world's most robust source for full-time, hybrid, and remote work requirements. The Flex Index represents more than 4,000 companies, 25,000 office locations, and 100 million people. It's a great place to start if you're looking for your next flexible work career opportunity. Today, my guests are Carly Zakin and Danielle Weisberg, co-founders of theSkimm. Started in 2012, theSkimm is a media company dedicated to succinctly giving women the information they need to make confident decisions. In true Skimm fashion, we're going to succinctly dive into three important topics. First, theSkimm just put out an eye-opening and sobering report on the state of women. We'll talk about the most important findings. Second, the report found that 84% of women have or are looking to set up a more flexible working schedule. We'll talk about why flexible work is in such high demand. And lastly, we'll get into actionable recommendations to better support women based on the report's findings. Hello, and welcome to the Flex Perspectives podcast. I'm Rob Sadow, CEO and co-founder at Scoop. I'm so excited to have Carly Zakin and Danielle Weisberg on the podcast. Carly and Danielle are the founders of theSkimm, an incredibly important media company dedicated to succinctly giving women the information they need to make confident decisions. Carly and Danielle, welcome.
Hi, this is so exciting. Thanks so much for having us. We're excited to get into it today with you.
No, it's my pleasure. Thank you for being here. Carly, you and Danielle launched theSkimm over 10 years ago now. So tell me a little bit about how theSkimm gets started, who the audience is, and maybe a little bit about what the scale of theSkimm is today.
Sure. So as you said, we started theSkimm a little over 10 years ago. Danielle and I are longtime friends and both had come up and worked in news on the production side. And after college, I would say we noticed how constantly our friends who are super smart and really well educated and were on tracks with great careers were coming to us and saying, tell me what happened today. Just fill me in. And they were coming to us with that kind of problem and prompt because traditional outlets were not reaching them where they were. We're not talking to them in a voice that resonated. And honestly, they were really busy, just like we all are. And when Danielle and I would kind of exchange stories about that and sort of took a wider look at the macro landscape at the time, it's quaint to think about it now. But at the time, we were like, wow, news is at the peak of being noisy. We're like, Twitter has never been noisier and cable news has never been noisier. And, little did we know it was probably the quiet time. But at the time, we were like, there's just, we need to figure out a way to clear the noise. And when we really tapped into what did our friends represent, it was really the generation of millennial women. And, today that kind of word millennial is very overused. At the time, it was not. And what this generation represents is something that really the world's never seen before. Never have you had a generation that has so much power, so much going for her. She's the key voting bloc. She's actually entering the C-suite. She is influencing $3.5 trillion in spending. She is making all financial decisions in her household. But she is drowning. She is still fighting to close the wage equity gap. She is still fighting for paid family leave. She is still fighting for the seat at the table. And there was such a discrepancy around how companies were reaching her. And we knew we could do it in a really authentic way. So we started with a daily newsletter called the Daily Skimm. Now it is expanded into really an ecosystem that lives across many platforms. We reach over 12 million of her across all of our platforms. We have 5 different newsletters that touch on everything from news to her money to her purchasing decisions. We have a B2B marketing newsletter, marketers newsletter, podcast, an app, a video studio, and actually just launched an in-house creative agency called SKM Lab. So excited to kind of share all of that with you today.
It's awesome. It's a whole media empire at this point. And I wish things were as quiet as they were 10 years ago, in retrospect, right? You were talking a little bit about the state of women and what's happening across generations, but also with millennials specifically. You just launched the State of Women report. And Danielle, can you tell me a little bit more about what is the State of Women campaign and why did it feel so important to take on this initiative?
Sure. Well, as Carly went through, the Skimm on the state of women is that it's not good. That's the headline. And I think for years we had heard anecdotally from our audience on what was going on, pressure building in certain areas of their life, despite having a lot of these kind of generational advantages.
that we were poised to take advantage of and really step into. And I think these last few years of the pandemic, which we know adversely affected women, especially women of color, has wiped away decades of progress towards gender equality. We knew it was bad, but we didn't know it was this bad. And where we really dug into that and found out what was really going on from a data perspective is through our State of Women campaign and our corresponding report. So we teamed up with Harris to poll and survey a ton of women and launched our State of Women campaign, which is data-driven, action-oriented. It focuses not only on the fact that women are in crisis, which we've all felt in different ways for the past few years. That's not a surprise, but really on what we can do and are doing to change the status quo. Our goal with the campaign was to make it known. I feel like anything in our society that we can kind of like shove aside or pretend not to see, we do. And I think especially with how much women are taking on in their various roles at work, as caregivers, as partners, as mothers, as heading up the household. There's just so much. And we know that the systems in place were never designed to support women in this equal playing field. Women have been shouting about this for years, and it hasn't gone anywhere. So we felt like it was the right time to take a look at how women are feeling and doing just on their own, not in comparison to other audiences, not in comparison to other generations, but just in this moment of such unprecedented challenges. And that's what we did. And I think that what we want to be the takeaway is you see the issue, you get involved. Either that means you are a woman that's feeling this and you're seeing what other people are going through, or you're going to be someone that's going to pitch in and help. But really, we're making it clear and transparent what is going on. And then finally, to understand that underlying this is a really huge economic risk. We're talking about a $3.1 trillion at risk to the U.S. economy if we don't figure out how to keep and better support women in the workforce.
One of the things I found really interesting and pretty eye-opening, honestly, was the research and the statistics specifically around unpaid labor and mental load and how women are asked to take on more than men in that regard. What did you think about that? And tell me a little bit about what those topics, unpaid labor and mental load, mean to you specifically.
Oh my goodness. Well, I think if you talk to, any woman, she will kind of nod and smile knowingly when you talk about kind of the unpaid labor. I think especially if you talk to those who, have children and are juggling, multiple responsibilities, there is a kind of knowing sigh that I think that they all share. And to me, what was actually the most sobering statistic, which at first when we saw this one, we almost laughed. It felt almost funny until we actually really thought about what it meant, which was that 71% of millennial women say it is their job to be the chief worry officer. Now, we joke we love to see women in the C-suite. Only 5% of C-suite is made up of women, but this is not what we had in mind. And I think, when we talk about 76% of her agree that women are largely responsible for the unpaid labor and mental load at home, what does that really mean? It means that there are so many unspoken things that she is thinking about doing, taking care of in the home, in addition to all of her other responsibilities, whether, raising a family and or, having a career. And then, when you look at some of the other stats that we uncovered, that what is the number one thing on her mind right now? It's mental health. And, we're talking to you today, 3 years coming out of the pandemic, 1 in 5 of her are saying that she has experienced a mental health condition like depression or anxiety. That is really alarming. That is a moment that we as a society need to take stock of what are we saying? It means you take 5 of us in a room, 1 of us is actively dealing with a mental health crisis. And 76% of us are yeah, I do all this unpaid shit at home. Sorry, I hope I can curse. And the fact that she's saying chief worry officer, what you're describing is literally saying my job is to be stressed. Now, you don't have to be a doctor to know that is really not a healthy existence. And the fact that then she is trying to combat societal structures or corporate structures that are not actually created to help her, but in many cases make that stress compounded, is really alarming and where society is failing her.
It strikes me that as I hear it, and the data is so overwhelming, the 76% number that you gave. I think there was another one on 82% of millennial women talk about how overburdened women are, but no one's actually helping them ease the burden. The idea of how do you pursue a career and also a fulfilling life at home, be able to balance those things when it feels like the playing field is so unequal. To me, that was pretty staggering to think about.
For sure. And I think, generationally, it's really interesting too, because of, I think millennials are a unique generation given there are so many of them. And so we always knew we were going to make up the bulk of the workforce. I think what is so different about this is that we thought we were going to be poised to really take advantage of being more educated than our parents. And that would, show up in our earning power. And we just haven't really been able to see that. So I think so much of this is, I think, enlightening for a lot of people who don't understand why, you may not want to have a family. You may not want to have kids. It's so expensive. And there's already a ton of pressure for an audience that is going to be taking care of their parents and their kids at the same time. So I think that the way that I've looked at it and a way that I think a lot of other people have seen it is, wow, that stat is surprising or that stat is alarming. And then when you take a step back, I think, unfortunately, it really makes sense, right? That 20% of women are thinking like, maybe I actually, don't want to be a parent. Maybe that's not something that I can afford, or maybe that's not a stressor that I want to add into my life. And I think all of it really works to paint the full picture of what is going on for women.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting in that context that you just shared, Danielle, some of the interest in flexible and hybrid work within the survey. And I think if I recall the statistic correctly, it was 84% of women are either in or looking for a more flexible or hybrid work schedule. That's a huge percentage. Why do you think that is, in the context of some of the data points you were just talking about?
I think it's interesting that we went from having a society that and by the way, the Skimm was totally part of this pre-COVID, right? Like, we thought it's like, you build a place that people want to show up to every single day. And a lot of the way that we defined culture was how we worked together. And that together meant like actually in the same place. And when I think back on it, that was so incredibly difficult for any working parent. Think about, how even school hours or doctor appointments hours, all of these things are not set up to support two working parents. And yet when you look at our economy, you really need to have two working parents to be able to afford raising kids and supporting a family, especially with the dependents that we've talked about. So it's not a surprise that people were struggling prior to the pandemic. It's just there wasn't necessarily an answer. And then I think as a society, we all went through this at once. And, from that period in time too, men were home as well, obviously. And so they took on more in that period, more sharing in caregiving and in household responsibilities, whatever that meant. And then coming out of it, it's not like anyone was jumping for joy to go back into how things were, right? Obviously, people are excited for normalcy, but it was also the opportunity to say, hey, the idea that I can, figure out how to have a schedule that doesn't take up a huge chunk of my time commuting is a great way to promote efficiency. I think that also combined with the idea that there was for a long time kind of this employee market, right? We saw wages were going up. There was a lot of competition to create different workforces that worked specifically for employees to keep them there. It all went to this idea that people's lives aren't necessarily mimicking what the societal kind of schedules like were pandemic. And there's no real reason to be able to return to that when it didn't work in the first place.
I remember it specifically even for Jess, my wife, who Carly knows very well. And pre-pandemic, I think about her experience, and she was commuting to a company from San Francisco in Silicon Valley, taking the bus 2 or 3 hours each day, and just thinking about how that stacked up and impacted life, compared to what it is today and the level of flexibility.
I think that's the key, which is it's flexibility. Like we, as both employees of the Skimm and as CEOs of the Skimm, like in person is really important. There is such value in being able to collaborate in a room with people and like have that physical, experience, right, together. But the flexibility is what is so important. And I think what, we shouldn't see is as awful as sort of the pandemic, had been and was for so many of us trying to do so many different things at once, let alone take care of our health. There were some positive things in the workplace. And obviously you're the first one to kind of see that and that opportunity. But some of the positives was that sharing of that unpaid and unseen labor and for employers to sort of see, and we're included in that, to see the benefits of how can you do what you normally do at home. And I think what scares us is and what has scared women, and again, go back to that stat, 84% of her are looking for some sort of flexibility when it comes to the workplace. When companies are like, everyone back in the office 5 days a week, 9 to 5, like we're checking you Friday afternoon at 5 o'clock, that is basically saying, it's basically putting up a giant middle finger to anybody that is like, I want to be here, but I need some flexibility. And the people that are saying that are largely women. So you can't be a company that says, I care about having more women in the C-suite. I care about developing our senior female talent, and then also say, well, we won't have any flexibility. You just can't have those two things exist in the same space.
Yeah, that's really powerful and well said. Curious, do you think it is the work location flexibility in terms of how much time you spend in the office versus out? Is it the hours flexibility in terms of being able to be on and offline at different times to be outside?
I'll answer as an employer, and then Danielle, you have two little ones, so you can answer from personal experience. And I think it's both. When I look back, like pre-pandemic, as us as employers, there are so many times I didn't think twice about being like, oh, let's get so and so and let's talk at 5 o'clock. And I didn't think they had to catch a train or a bus or whatever it was to get home. And by me scheduling a 5 o'clock meeting last minute, they probably missed dinner time with their kids, or maybe didn't get to pick them up off the bus. And as an employer, like I didn't have that awareness. Today, I think we very much have that awareness. So I think it is both. It is the time and it is the physical location. But Danielle, obviously,
I think, yeah. So I've had my two little pandemic babies. And so I became a parent in this very, very weird moment in time. And I think that what is interesting is I feel like I can answer for myself, but I can't necessarily answer for others. And I think that's a huge thing that I've learned, because so much of it is, yes, I love the flexibility of being able to be home and feeling like I get to see my kids at this really, really young stage that I know a lot of people miss out on and really feel that. And in the other way, I'm like, I want to go to the office. Like, I need to get out of the house. I want to have a place where like I get to be my professional identity and self. And that is also really, really important to me to separate. And I know a lot of parents who feel that way as well. I also think, something that is going to come up more and more as well on location flexibility is going to be about aging parents as our parents get older and how that affects where you're working. And I think having time flexibility, with obviously some constraints. And I think this is the part that's really difficult for any sort of employer out there is you don't want to have to balance like 10 different work schedules, right? So I think to the degree that you can offer flexibility per teams and that person is still getting their work done, but they're doing it on a different hour and it's not affecting the team, like do it. I think that's great. And so I do feel like there's a lot more spotlight on individuals instead of necessarily kind of like a group way of doing something.
I even saw it personally, Danielle. I don't think we've talked about this, but I have a 20-month-old, and so I've got one pandemic baby, not two.
Yeah.
But I saw it firsthand, even in terms of how it changes for the same person over the course of time, right? Watching Jess come back from parental leave and the importance of flexibility in that time and how different that must have been for parents even 5 years ago. That was dramatic. And I know family leave is a topic that's pretty near and dear to both of you as well.
Yeah, paid family leave is something we have gotten really loud about as a company over the last year and a half. We launched an initiative called Show Us Your Leave after Build Back Better bill last year basically showed us they weren't going to prioritize a national leave policy that was acceptable. And it began as a viral movement, honestly, of women across the country sharing what their leave looked like while trying to make it work. And I mean, the pictures, we knew it was bad. We didn't know how bad it was. I mean, the two that stand out in my mind, there was one woman who shared with us a picture of herself in the hospital in active labor with her laptop on the contraction monitor, trying to get her emails in by midnight, because at midnight she would qualify for some sort of leave from her employer. The second that I still think about was a NICU nurse who at a hospital, she only had 10 days of paid leave. So she had a child, she had to go back 10 days, so no recovery time or, ability to even be with her child, and then help parents care for their children. And just, the irony of that, especially, I would call out, both in the medical and education fields, the stories in particular were especially just horrifying. And so those stories kind of took on a movement and life of their own. And then that really turned into a call for companies to basically say, we will show us your leave. We'll show you what leave looks like at this company. And so we actually ended up creating a database, which you can find on our website, that, now over 650 companies have not only shared, but in many cases changed what their policies were to be competitive. And so that when you are looking for a job, you can come to our website and actually see what the benefits and policies are. And, it's really a matter of how our company is supporting you as an employee during life. And life is going to have highest of highs, like expanding your family and maybe, getting married or whatever it is. And the lowest of lows, like maybe a pregnancy loss or maybe the death of a parent. And how is a company showing up for their employees, I think is really the message here. And, I go back again to what do we learn from our survey and from talking to our audience. Over 83% of her have said that she has no confidence that the government is going to help solve the paid leave crisis. So what does that tell us? It tells us that it's up to companies to actually create the change. It also then it makes a lot of sense. Over 65% of our audience says that they are interested in exploring political office, which I thought was honestly one of the most uplifting parts of this whole survey, which is she's creating the change herself. And I think that's what we really want to get through, and when we talk about state of women, a lot of this is very sobering and, depressing. But I think what's amazing about this generation is she's you know what? Nobody is solving this for me. So I'm going to solve it for myself and for future generations. And so I thought that the political interest that she was expressing was really great to see.
Yeah, it appears people are not stepping back, right? Women are not stepping back from it. They're saying, look, I can be a change agent, which is really inspiring and empowering. Do you think, if you think about across the different pieces of flexibility we talked about, so work location, hours, parental leave, will this start to move the needle if companies start to adopt at scale in terms of creating some of these opportunities? How much of an impact do we think this can actually have?
I mean, I think it could have a huge impact. I think that, when people are looking, especially in competitive job markets, right? When people are looking at companies, I think that there's been a real switch on kind of what are the shiny things. And especially when you offer location flexibility, those things kind of go away in a sense. And I think that culture is defined and will continue to be defined on what are the actual policies. And a lot of that is what we are actually talking about here. It's kind of the meat of how a company is going to support you. And those are the things that I really want companies to be like yelling about and competing about. Like, I would love for it to be, there's as much of a competition on, whose paid family leave is better as there are kind of like on bonus structures. And I know that sounds a bit ridiculous, but I think that is in some ways as important on like, what are the options that you're going to offer for helping families, whether that is, wanting to start a family and grow a family, or, on the other end of aging parents. And I think also what's really interesting, kind of as I'm saying this too, fits with why we're seeing women take more of considering more on the political bent, is that these are some things that I think we've kind of always thought government would figure out. And they're just not. And that's not a Democratic thing. That's not a Republican thing. It's that we are a huge demographic, right? Millennials there's like a ton of us, and we've inherited a lot of debt. And we kind of thought these things would be figured out. And instead, like, we're at the crux of systems that just don't make sense. So I think even moving the needle on one of these things from a systemic standpoint, and if we can't have that as like a nice thing from a kind of just a business norm standpoint, can have huge impacts to not only the mental stress and health that we're seeing impacted, but I think, to our GDP, to making sure that we are having a workforce that is strong, that we're continuing to have kids, and that we can actually retire. And I think all of those things all of those pieces that we talked about, each one of those policies plays a role in being able to have that.
So let's talk a little bit about that and those actions that people, companies can take tomorrow, to start to create a better future, or maybe next time the State of Women report comes out, that it looks a little brighter than the one that just came out. Let's start with women listening. If there's a single message or takeaway that you want to deliver, what's the most important thing here?
I think that it's, we know it's not fair, but like, we're creating the change ourselves and you're a part of it. And so I think, there's so many examples from our community where, we have a woman in Queens who, she was like, I'm going to use workplace software to help delegate household tasks because I'm tired of being the one to do all this unpaid labor. We have a woman, Laura in New Hampshire, who like very simply just stopped saying yes to every request, which really shocked her family, but it's actually made for a much healthier version of herself. So I think, for women, it's about championing the changes that we are actually creating ourselves. And, at the very, beginning step, it's like, even on our website, we have the template of how you should go, kind of go to the higher ups at your company to ask for a more aggressive paid leave policy. And I can't tell you how many hundreds of thousands of stories and anecdotes we've gotten from people saying they're making changes now, or we're having the conversation. And so, again, while it's not fair, we are creating the change, and it is going to happen.
That's awesome. So for men that are listening and want to be more supportive of the women in their lives, what are a few things that men should be thinking about maybe differently tomorrow than the way they've behaved today or in the past?
I mean, I think I think it's a twofold strategy, right? So there's two steps. I think the first is like, get in the game. So I love what Eve Brodsky, the work she's done around fair play. There's a book, there's a documentary, there's even like a card game. So pick which one you want to do with your partner. And I think it's really understanding, like, taking a minute to see what is really going on. And I think that, it's easy for everyone in their day-to-day to get hung up on like, well, I did this or you did that. And it's much more about taking a much wider look at the data around gender roles. And I think that that's what, we've done with this survey. I think it's a lot of what Eve Brodsky, the fantastic work that she's done as well. So I think understand what the situation is, understand that things are not fair. It's not an equal playing field, and kind of take a minute to accept that, and then call it out. So I think it's like, understand it and then call it out. And that means making sure that you are taking your leave when you're having a family, when you're adding to your family, or making sure that, when things are not good, that you're also in the mix and in whatever care dynamic that is. I think it's also advocating for these policies of flexibility in your work environment as well. Because the more that you're able to call it out, I think it's also, all of this is helpful to really make sure that men are viewed as true partners, that there is a lot of equality. And I think that, when it's we first have to make everyone aware of the problem, and then we need people to step in and help. And I think, luckily, it's pretty clear the areas that voicing support can go a long way.
I think that point on men taking leave is such an important point, and you really realize over time how much the employees at a company will follow what executives do or don't do, not by the words they say necessarily, but by the actions they do or don't take. And if male executives at companies don't take leave, the likelihood that others will take leave or that women will feel like it's even in that sense, significantly decreases. So I think that point is such an important one. Let's continue a little bit more on the company context. For managers of women, thinking about some of the things we've just talked about in the experience in the workplace, what should maybe managers be thinking about in terms of being more supportive or enabling women to have equal outcomes in their careers to men in their companies or in their careers?
I mean, I think step one, it seems basic, but many of us need to be reminded of it, and I think ourselves included, of listen. Listen to what your employee needs. What is the flexibility she needs to get her job done and to show up in the best way possible? Are there areas of development and learning that you as a manager or as a company can help coach or support her in? What are behaviors that you see she exhibits in meetings that might hold her back? Or where is she getting silenced in a meeting, and how do you create the space for that not to happen? And I think, it's especially true for women of color, but, I think these are all different ways that really have an accumulative effect of how do you best support not just the women who, are in your workplace, but actually keeping them in your workplace and getting them to that next level.
And what about for executives or maybe written more broadly for folks that are thinking about anything from company culture to policy, anything else on the policy or practice side? We talked about leave, but leave or...
Yeah. Well, I think that the idea of, and I don't think this is easy, right? And so I don't mean to say that it is. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of this is falling on companies to come up with what this future is going to look like, because we're not seeing it. We're not getting that guidance from kind of government being able to move quickly enough to support this next generation or this generation of the people that make up the workforce. So I think that, if in the past, kind of the social contract that you had between like a worker and the government and the company you worked for was like, if you're working for X amount of years, you're going to retire with this package, and, you'll put in this and you'll get a pension, or Social Security will definitely be there. Like, don't worry. I don't want to be too negative, but I think overall, like those are not things that we necessarily take for granted anymore at all. So I think it's more about being able to look at who this worker actually is and what they need, right? So obviously everyone wants to retire, but like what age is that actually going to happen at, and how many jobs are you going to have before that? And those numbers are drastically different than, boomers or even Gen X. And I think that that's where you're able to kind of like rethink the policies, where it might be paying off student debt could be a priority in your workforce ahead of coming up with a 401k. And maybe that's obviously could obviously be completely the wrong thing depending on your workforce. But I guess I'm saying there isn't, because of how different this generation is. There is not the one size fits all that's been given to us as kind of like this standard policy of what you should offer, I don't think works.
Yeah, it sounds like there's some fresh thinking that's required regardless,
Yes.
right, in terms of what's going to be most helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything else in terms of takeaways or action items that we haven't touched on that you think are important to spend a moment on?
I feel like we did touch on all of them. The only thing I would just emphasize is that this change only happens and the state of women only changes if we really do have our male peers and counterparts understand the significance and step up. And I think I just don't want to underestimate that.
I think for me, it's an economic issue. I think people get lost and where a lot of this comes down to kind of different factions and arguments is on making it like a gender clash. And instead of thinking about it that way, it's about, we want a strong economy. And this is a huge part of how we can get there.
I really appreciate the work that you've both done and the Skimm has done broadly on this topic, because I think you've put out a report that's very easy to digest and the numbers make it really clear to understand kind of like the state of play today and where some of those issues are. And I truly believe that understanding what's happening clearly is a first step towards solving anything, right? So I appreciate all of the work and leadership that you both put into that.
Thank you.
Of course. Well, we always, before we finish up, I always ask a few kind of like rapid fire type questions just so folks who are listening can get to know you a little bit better as people and individuals beyond the topics we cover. So if you don't mind, I'll throw out a few things too. You can both answer or one can answer.
Great.
Whatever you prefer. All right. First question. What was your first job?
Babysitter.
Babysitter, mother's helper.
Babysitter. Got it. Okay. Best book you've read lately?
Oh, I'm excited to answer this. It's a new book about to come out, actually written by one of our very first Skimm employees. It is called Social Engagement, and it's by Avery Carpenter-Forey, and it is excellent.
Same.
Awesome.
We're very proud of Avery.
That's awesome. When you do meetings with video conference, are you typically video on or video off?
It depends the time of the day. I will say there's just at some point in the day, I'm like, I don't want to see myself anymore. I don't want to see you. Like, I'm here to get it done, and I don't want to interact.
Yeah, I would echo that.
I feel the same way, especially as the weather gets nicer, could do online meetings and things like that too is nice. A show or movie that you're obsessed with right now?
Succession.
So Succession, but also I just started Beef, and I really like it.
I saw there's a New York Times article, I think, written about
it's really good. I'm only in episode 3, but I'm into it. Oh, actually, I changed my answer. Love is Blind.
Got it. Favorite snack when you're in the office?
For me, it's chocolate, like Hershey Kiss, Hershey Bar, like chocolate. Hershey should sponsor me.
I'm really boring with my snacks. I just have peanut butter all the time. But we have a bevy machine, and I know water is not a snack and should not be categorized. But the novelty of being able to choose my carbonation level and what flavoring, I don't have that at home. That's amazing.
Favorite piece of flexible work software?
Sure. It's a love-hate, but Zoom.
Ring light. No, it's not software. It's hardware, but I feel like it's necessary.
And what is ring light?
It's like the light that you put on.
Rob definitely does not know.
I do not know.
It's the light that just it really filters you when you're on camera.
We didn't use it today.
Now I'm going to furiously search for ring light afterward for next time.
Ask her.
I appreciate that. What is one future of work or flexible work thinker or speaker or writer that you really respect?
I actually really always go back to Adam Grant. I think Adam Grant, I really leaned on him for managerial advice, and I think he's been really helpful in understanding he's adapting work cultures. And I feel like I don't know anybody that doesn't look to him for advice, but I truly do.
I said Eve Rodsky, and I would totally echo that. I also think that We have a fantastic chief people officer, Lisa Dallenbach, and she's just helped us navigate so much over the past few years. So I feel really grateful to have her on our team.
It's hard to overstate the importance of having a great chief people officer. And then one final question for you. Where should listeners go if they want to read more, learn more about any of the topics that we've covered today?
theskimm.com/stateofwomen.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much. I really appreciate it. It's always a pleasure being able to catch up.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. It's so nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too, Danielle and Carly. Always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed the show, you can subscribe on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Please also consider giving us a rating or leaving a review, as that helps other listeners find the podcast. For more Flex Index content, including past episodes, our Flex Index newsletter, and monthly research reports, visit flex.scoopforwork.com. See you next time.